whoever's speaking as well to make that a lot easier. So, loads of things going on. So we're over into Mark. You're the
Yep,
purple zone, right? Is that right?
absolutely right. It's the purple zone. It's the most favourite spot of everybody's to drop in. So, anyway, do you want me to start now?
Yes, if you start, and I'll just put a spotlight on you. There you go.
Okay, so on Friday, we started off with what material requirements are there for currently in the different transport systems. Unfortunately, we seem to get sort of sidetracked into a lot of automotive stuff, but eventually we moved across into some of the others. But I suspect that we haven't covered everything that we should have done in sort of the boats and planes and trucks and trains bits. But we covered a lot from automotive. Essentially, if you look at the outputs from that, we have a lot of different metals. We have obviously aluminium, a little of aluminium, a lot in aircraft and a little bit in boats, and a smaller amount in automotive. A lot of steel in automotive, and then we have nickel-based superalloys for things like aero engines. A lot of composites, mainly in the aircraft sector, and then we have other areas such as rare earths, copper for electric vehicles, and obviously aerospace fly-by-wire aircraft fly-by-wire stuff, and then continuous supplies of things like lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese for high-density batteries. We then looked, so covering a lot of the metals side, I would suggest that what we didn't look at and cover very well was some of the non-metallics that might exist in transport systems. That might be something we should probably address today. We then looked at some barriers, and which would help, or sorry, some things that would help us move towards our vision for 2050. What we found difficult was actually finding what potentially would be in the requirements for 2050. Looking forward to saying these are requirements for 2050 was very, very difficult. So we think that we've got the same sort of materials in 2050, but perhaps more of the stuff that might go into electric vehicles. We felt that there needed to be a balanced agenda. We also looked at the fact that we needed to do something on LCA and reduced carbon. So whatever we do, we need to have reduced carbon. That maybe transport modes would also change as well. In the end, we had some things that might slow the progress, but we eventually got to defining 6 challenges. One was the lack of legislation in a blocker in industry, which would not help solve the circular economy. Another one was LCA is not implemented in the design phase. Another challenge was that clean energy needs to be used for extraction and manufacturing. A fourth was standards that prohibit progression. Effective recycling was another challenge. And the last one was materials passporting.
And he's up before the bing bong. Excellent. Thank you very much, Mark. That was perfect. Beautifully done. So following that, Steve, I think you had your hand up. So can we go to you?
That's absolutely fine. We were looking at social trends, which is a rather challenging topic. We're not trying to predict exactly how society specifically will change as a whole between now and 2050, but some things threw themselves out at us. We spent a lot of time talking about ownership change, that there might be a sense in which owning a car is actually seen as as some sort of evil. But clearly shared ownership is likely to increase, and that sharing is blurred. Are you sharing it with other people in your street, or are you sharing it with a ride service like Uber? Another big trend is going to be, we're going to be buying more stuff that will be delivered to the door. We might go to the shop, but we might not drive back. We might cycle to the shop, cycle back, and the delivery will arrive. We talked about life while moving around. So with autonomy, with being on trains and planes. We're not actually engaged with the act of driving. Therefore, life is different. But also we talked about moving while living. So employment is going to change. And as we've seen under COVID, maybe people will commute less. And we talked about those types of changes. Out of that, we identified a number of enablers and a number of blockers. Couple of the enablers, things like the government desire for net zero and leveling up. That desire has to be implemented into very practical things, which might then become very positive enablers. We talked about the recycling technology and recycling industry could be an enabler, but like many enablers, equally, if they go down particular directions, could become blockers. On the blockers side, we identified one major thing, which I think is going to be a theme, and that is system design. So you will see people like Ford designing cars and Shell designing fuel and Uber designing mobility services. But actually, if you want a circular mobility system, those people have to work really closely together. We took two of the challenges and worked them up in detail. And we deliberately chose a really awkward one, a dispute over public space. And I really love this one. What happens when you don't have a car, but Uber has purchased the car parking space outside of your house, and they keep parking a high-sided van in there and stealing the utility of your view? And we had a really interesting conversation about who owns the roads. How do we tax the roads? Are those public spaces anymore, or are they becoming privatized? That was a really interesting debate. And the other debate that we had was on design of service, and one dimension, not the integrating of the different actors, another dimension we talked about under design of service was how do we balance the desire for personalization? I want my car to be mine and to be really comfortable for me and my family, with the fact there is not my car. I don't own it. So that's another particular design challenge in there. That's our challenges. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That was great. And over now, I'm going to let you, Evie and Richard, just fight it out now.
I'm happy to go ahead.
Okay.
So
we're into the green zone.
Yeah, so we looked at the role of circular economy to satisfy material requirements up to 2050. And we started by trying to put a future vision of what transport system will look like and what sort of material requirements we may have. So there was a lot of discussion.
Sorry, Evie, that was the previous Bing Bong. It's gone terribly wrong with the Bing Bongs. Right, we're there.
3 minutes is very short.
Yeah, it's not as short as that.
So we're just talking about transport systems, and I think that a lot of the people in my table agree that we would like transport systems with minimum impact on the environment across the whole supply chain. We would like to use more low carbon and sustainable materials. We would like to have everything recycled at the end of life and use more biodegradable components. And we would like to have much better material standardization and better understanding of what materials are used in the transport. We then looked at what our current state is and the things that they came out were that there's limited recycling. We use a lot of primary materials in our transport systems, but also as fuel. There's a lot of downcycling going on and very little materials that are kept in a circular loop in transport. And there's a lack of policy enablers and regulations. Although we do have regulation out there, it's not fit for purpose. We then tried to identify top priorities for enablers for our vision to 2050 and what challenges we may have. Our top enablers were setting international standards for materials in transport systems, producer responsibility for materials, and how we could kind of look at what happens to materials at the end of their life, cascading use, recycling, minimize environmental impact. And the third one was developing visions for technology in the future that they actually take into consideration materials. So having foresight studies that they actually look into material supply chains in more detail, which is something that's not happening much at the moment. Regarding the challenges, the lack of data to understand material systems was a big one. Which obviously it's a massive bottleneck when it comes to making decisions about the circular economy, lack of capacity within the UK for processing, recycling, refurbishing, etc. And how can we balance out carbon and circularity within transport systems? That was something else that was highlighted. We then went into our deep dives and we picked up these top priorities and tried to look at them. We only managed to go through one of them, producer responsibility. And we spent quite a bit of time trying to define what these actually mean. So there was a lot of discussion about how the current system is very much value driven. There's no holistic approach that takes into consideration different resources and materials in transport systems, not much focus on things like technology, metals and other critical resources, low circularity incentives in terms of regulations. And I think we stopped somewhere there really. So that's all.
Thank you very much. That's great. Thank you. And I know during that session, Sumit and Deborah, you just joined us. So we're just doing a bit of an update on what happened last time. And you'll get the chance to choose which group you want to join as well. So we're into our final of the summaries. So moving over to the blue table.
Okay, thanks, Christine. So on the blue table, our topic was what will be the material supply chains with CE principles in 2050. And I have to say we concentrated largely on material supply chains and CE principles. I think we didn't spend much time on what will be the material supply chains. So that's something we'd like to pick up in the deep dive. The things we identified in terms of future vision was we needed clear understanding of the sort of life cycle of materials and down cycles and like-for-like recovery and recycling. A strong point was made about transitioning to a low carbon economy requiring new supply chains and that they need to be designed with circular principles in mind from the word go. Academic research actually emerged as a theme so that we can understand and align the challenges that are coming. And LCA also came out, and we've heard one or two other tables speak of that. We identified a set of enablers and blockers. Enablers were, as you might imagine, government funding, international agreements, legislation and standards, economics, both as a positive and as a negative. So if the regulation and legislation is right, then the economics might be turned more favorable than they are at present. And thinking of blockers, the economics in a number of cases of recovery and recycling are really pretty unfavorable. And unless something's done to adjust that, they'll probably remain so. There was also a piece about the political will to think in terms of systems and system thinking, and sort of integrative thinking came through very strongly. The current status of the material supply chains, a number of issues were pointed to, securing supply chains by having a government and industry working together. There were some very good examples. The aerospace sector was pointed out as being one in which closed and open loop recycling was strongly suggested. And from those discussions, we picked out 4 deep dive areas. Poor economics was seen as a significant challenge. Lack of big picture or collaborative thinking, another big challenge. Industrial symbiosis in practice was seen as an opportunity area if we can enable that. And international agreements and essentially legislation and agreements can pave the way towards these new supply chains. So there was a very strong emphasis on collaboration and agreements. And really interestingly, some of those themes emerged, particularly on table 1, despite their highly acquisitive nature of the leader of table 1, the purple table. Have a lot in common actually with that, which is interesting for sense and the road mapping. So thanks very much, Christine and everyone.
Perfect. Thank you. Beautifully timed. So thank you very much for that. And I hope that's given those of you who weren't able to join us on Friday, giving you a sense of how things have evolved, where we've got up to. What you will know is that each table has gone in a slightly, we're all using the same road mapping process. Some, like Evie's table, went